Hello, everyone, and welcome into the 31st episode of Jack's Mailbag, the series where I answer your Gamecock athletics questions. If you have a question or topic you want to discuss on next week's episode, be sure to drop a comment in the comments section below on this YouTube video, or I'll post on the Insiders Forum on GamecockCentral.com, where you can ask any and all of your questions or any topics you'd like to discuss. This week, we're actually going to be talking about all three sports. I can't remember the last time that's happened, so that's going to be real awesome. We're going to be talking a little bit of baseball, a little bit of men's basketball, and of course, we're going to be looking at South Carolina football's matchup in Norman this weekend against the Oklahoma Sooners. So without further ado, let's get into our first question of the week from 9 rushes, 18 yards, who asks, just wondering, is Blake Jackson on the baseball team? I have been to a few scrimmages and he hasn't been playing. He is still on the roster they hand out. Yeah, so Blake is definitely still playing. He's on the roster. Matter of fact, when this question got asked, Blake hadn't been playing for the last few weeks, I think since like the first week of scrimmages, maybe like early second week. But he did make his return to action on Wednesday, and he had missed some time with an apparent hamstring injury. And he, in the scrimmage on Wednesday, Wes Mitchell was there on behalf of Gamecock Central, since I'm getting ready to go out to OU on Friday. So apparently, Jackson had been limited from sprinting, but he was able to take some at-bats. He, overall, in the fall, he's only had 5 at-bats so far. He's drawn 3 walks. He struck out once. So it's good to see that he was back out there. I figured this wasn't going to be some sort of long-term thing, but of course, with a hamstring-type injury, why run the risk of even making it worse, potentially? So it makes sense why he was held out of action the last few weeks. And now he's back out there and playing again. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, it's going to be a little of a process to get him fully ramped up again to where he's good to go and stuff. We'll see what happens when South Carolina takes on Air Force next week in the first of 2 fall exhibition games. That's going to be next Saturday, October 26th at Founders Park. So that'll be a 14-inning scrimmage. And that'll be a real good indicator of where Blake is at, because obviously he only had like an at-bat or 2 on Wednesday. So it's going to be a little bit of a process, I'm sure, getting him back and ramped up. But it's good to see that he was back out there. So, yes, he is most certainly still a part of this team. GSB16 asks, when is the men's basketball secret scrimmage? Yeah, so I don't know. That's a great question, because it's a secret, and the Lamont Paris and company don't reveal much. And he did slip up a few weeks ago on Carolina Calls during the South Carolina football's first bye week, when he was talking with Derek Scott. And I think he had said that the Gamecocks were going to be playing NC State in some sort of closed-door scrimmage, and he kind of let the cat out of the bag on that one. And then when the media spoke with him a little, like maybe 2 weeks ago, he had mentioned that, he let the cat out of the bag on that one. He wasn't going to be really providing any more details. So if I had to take my best guess, I would assume it's going to be pretty soon here, because, next week is going to be, an important week for South Carolina. Like, you're getting super close to having your first exhibition match of the year, which is going to come against Paris's alma mater, the College of Wooster. So that'll be towards the end of the month. So between now and then, look, fall break is going on right now for the university. So I doubt it's going to be this week. So I would presume if it's not already happened, I would assume it's going to be sometime next week, but we'll have to see. And I'm not sure if that's going to be in Raleigh or it's going to be here in Columbia, but we'll have to see. And it'll be a real good test for South Carolina, because obviously I know NC State's roster is probably a little bit different, but that's a team that went to the Final Four last year. So that'll be a real great test for the Gamecocks, even if it's in a scrimmage format that there's no stats or anything. It's behind closed doors. Media is probably not even going to be invited. So we'll have to see what happens. But, we'll see. The South Carolina should be in a good position this year for a good season. And there's going to be some tough tests in non-conference play, unlike years past where your toughest test is usually like Clemson and stuff. Like this year, you go to Indiana. You play Xavier. You play all these different teams in that Fort Myers tournament. It's going to be – you obviously also have Clemson, like at home. It's going to be a really interesting non-conference slate, and then you jump into SEC play, and we know how SEC play will be. That's going to be tough, but I think South Carolina has proven before last year that it can weather that storm. We'll see if they can do it again. Next question comes from Love My Gamecocks, who asks a baseball question. Haven't seen Nolan Nolan since he hit his home run last week. Is he injured? So I'm not sure what the case is with Nolan, and I'm glad you brought this up because I haven't seen him out in action in, honestly, like you said, Love My Gamecocks, since he did hit a home run. And he's been pretty good for South Carolina. I mean, according to my stats, he's 3 for 10 so far this year. He's hit the home run. He's got a double and a single. So he's hitting 300 right now. And he's been playing over at third base. And that's a position that I think he could definitely win that battle at. We're going to have to see. So we don't know right now what the deal is with him. We haven't gotten a chance to speak to Paul Maneri. We haven't seen him out there at all. So we'll have to see what happens. It's probably just something similar to Blake Jackson where you don't want to run the risk of potentially getting him hurt anytime soon. And these, I don't even want to call them meaningless because they're still important to, these fall scrimmages are very important to see what your team looks like and see who your potential starting nine will be down the road. But right now, you don't want to even have a chance of losing Naraki for longer because he was one of your transfers that you picked up, and he could be a very impactful bat for this team come 2025. We've got another question here from 9 rushes, 18 yards, who asks, it seems Ethan Petri has been playing only right field in the fall practices. Do you see that sticking come spring? I haven't been impressed with first base play and seem to think he'd be better suited at first base with the amount of outfield depth we have. Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think, look, Ethan has been playing primarily right field. I haven't seen him play anywhere else in these fall scrimmages besides right field. And it looks like that could be where he returns to come 2025. We'll have to see. But it's also important to remember, like 9 rushes, 18 yards brought up, he does have the ability to play first base. We saw this firsthand last year where you had Gavin Casas over at that position, but then he slid over to third base, which allowed Petri to move into first base. And he played pretty good over there. I thought like he did a good job. I think he's better suited for the outfield just because he's able to cover a lot of ground out there and he has a pretty good arm. So I like him better in right field. And I think South Carolina has a lot of options at first base right now to where you probably don't even need to put him out there. You obviously have Bo Hollins coming in as an incoming freshman. He hasn't really come along yet in fall practices as a hitter, but obviously he's a switch hitting guy, and I think he's going to be just fine. And let's not forget Ethan Petri, when he was a freshman, he was struggling at the plate, and I think it took a while for him to hit his first home run when he was going through these fall scrimmages his first year. So I think Bo will come along nicely and be a nice option at first base. Then you also have a lefty power bat like Jace Woida, who is definitely going to be – it's hard to argue against him potentially being that starter at first base because he's a nice contact type of power threat at the plate. I think the defense is a little bit lacking at first base, but I think here's my assessment. I would say it seems like Bo is probably the better defensive first baseman, while Jace, I think, is probably the better hitting first baseman right now. At the same time, they do have a lot of outfield depth. That is very clear. Like, there's a lot of guys that there's only 3 spots in the outfield. You're probably going to be having Blake Jackson out there in the outfield starting. I would wager to say Nathan Hall. He's been very, very impressive in the outfield for South Carolina at the plate, and he also covers a lot of ground out there in center field. So it wouldn't shock me if he's also starting out there in center field. And then if Petri's playing the outfield, he's your starting right fielder. So not a lot of space for guys to fill voids, honestly, even if you move Petri over to first base. And that just takes a bat out of the lineup potentially. Like, yeah, you're going to have the benefit of the DH, but overall, you might be in a situation where you're going to have to figure out, like, okay, your first baseman is either Bo or Jace, and then you have Petri out and right, and then you figure out who your DH is from there. And we'll have to see what happens. But it's, I think Ethan, the short answer to this is I think you see Petri out in right field next year. And if there's any injuries or anything at first base, Petri's your guy to move over there. But we're going to have to see what happens. Next question comes from Gamecock Russ. What does it take to beat Oklahoma? Does South Carolina's defense score this weekend? So, yeah, this is going to be a very low-scoring type of game, I think, between Oklahoma and South Carolina. These are obviously 2 of the best defenses in the country. South Carolina is slightly better in terms of the metrics and stuff. But Oklahoma is very good too. And look, take out the Texas game last week where you get 34 points. I thought Oklahoma has been very solid this year. Like, they have been a very good team. They're giving up less than 20 points a game. They are going to be tough. They are really tenacious. They're going to make some big plays. And the one issue they have, and this was kind of prominent last week, because outside of that, I mean, like, they haven't really had many weaknesses. 15 missed tackles against Texas. So I think if you're South Carolina, you got to be slippery out there. You got to be tough to tackle and bring down. Like a Rocket Sanders, how tough is he going to be to bring down for this Oklahoma defense? Mazio Bennett is obviously slippery. He can get through, make some big plays. How are you going to tackle Nick Harbor if he gets the football? There's a lot of questions there that I think are very interesting. And I think South Carolina probably has the better offense. And that's kind of where Oklahoma lacks. And that's kind of crazy to say because, I mean, look, anyone that's watched Oklahoma football for the last, however many years, the Sooners have always been a team that scores a lot of points. They're more offensive heavy, and their defense is kind of lacking. At least that's how it was in the Big 12. But ever since Brett Venables, the former Clemson defensive coordinator, took over at Oklahoma, it's been a lot more of a defensive-minded approach, and the offense is kind of a work in progress. Like, they're down a lot of receivers right now. Their run game isn't great. Their offensive line isn't good either. And Michael Hawkins is their quarterback right now, and Jackson Arnold might end up redshirting and transferring. So there's a lot of question marks on that OU offense. At the same time, South Carolina has a lot of question marks of their own, though I don't think it's as bad as Oklahoma in terms of, okay, the only real issue for South Carolina, in my opinion, are the sacks and the turnovers. If you decide to, if you're going to protect the football better, if you're South Carolina, Lenora Sellers, I think you have a much better chance at winning this game because, look, against Alabama, let's be real, the turnovers on the fumbles definitely proved to be costly for South Carolina in that game against Alabama, where you end up losing by a few points. And it's like, hey, like if we didn't fumble here, we're probably winning this game. With a 5-point lead, you give the ball right back to Alabama, and what do? They go down and score. So you can't be giving a team like Oklahoma, who has a kind of not so great offense, you can't be giving them any chances to make it easier for them to score. And so I think this is going to be a real defensive battle. The other part of this question is, does South Carolina's defense score this weekend? I think it's coming. I think it is coming because, look, they played very well defensively, giving up 27 points against Alabama. They had the 2 interceptions. They had the bunch of sacks. I do think if the defensive line can force pressure on OU's quarterback, I think you're in a situation to where, if Hawkins has to, throw the ball up and he's in really tight pressure, I think South Carolina can go out here and kind of make him pay and make some big plays in that secondary, because I think the Gamecocks really do match up well in coverage against this banged up wide receiver group that the Sooners have right now. So I think this is South Carolina's chance to really prove that they can win this may not feel like a big game, but trust me, it definitely is. This is a big deal going to Oklahoma. And I think in Shane Beamer's first return back to OU, the Gamecocks need to come out here playing well. They got to score early. They got to show that their offense is making strides. And they did last week. Can you reduce the fumbles and the turnovers? And can you be better up front blocking and pass protection? You got to be able to protect Sellers, because when he's on, we saw it last week, the take away the turnovers. I thought he played very well for the most part and gave South Carolina a great chance to win that game against Alabama. And our final question comes from Marietta Gamecock 1987, who asks, any update on Oku Federico and his eligibility? Yes. So the last we had heard on Federico was 2 weeks ago when we spoke to Lamont Paris. And here's the exact quote, he hasn't been cleared in the NCAA all the way. We had some difficulty getting some information to the NCAA. He has not yet been certified completely, just trying to continue to navigate that process. So from the sound of it, and again, that was 2 weeks ago, we haven't gotten a chance to speak to Lamont since. Obviously, he's at SEC Media Days, but I'm not there, and I don't know if that question had been asked or anything, but it's a good indicator that, look, he's not on the official roster right now on the team's website and stuff. So I think that kind of points to, like, hey, just don't expect him to be playing this season. I think it'd be like, I can't even really give a percentage because I just truly don't know. But I would say, like, don't get your hopes up. I don't think he's going to be playing for South Carolina this year. And maybe that's something you figure out as the season goes along. I'm not sure. It's just a very complicated process, it seems like. But I think South Carolina they have some good forwards out there. You're obviously going to have Colin Murray-Boyles, Nick Pringle, Jordan Butler, and then BBV. I think those are four guys that you feel confident with Pringle and CMB being the starters. And then your second team coming in, you have Jordan Butler, who's a 7-footer, and then BBV. I think that's a pretty good four guys you have as big men right there. Obviously, BBV might seem like a little bit of an outlier, but trust me, I think he's a fine player. He brings a nice veteran presence and leadership aspect to his game. And as long as he gets in there and kind of rebounds and does his part in that way, I think you should feel fine about him. But as for Federico, I don't expect him to be suiting up for the Gamecocks anytime soon once the men's basketball season tips off. So that's going to do it for today's episode of Jack's Mailbag. Again, if you have any questions or topics you want to discuss on next week's episode, be sure to drop a comment in the comments section below on this YouTube video, or I'll have a post on the Insiders Forum on GamecockCentral.com where you can ask any of your questions, any topics y'all want to discuss. Let's do it. Let's have a good time talking some Gamecocks. South Carolina football is on the road again this weekend, taking their first trip to Norman to face the Oklahoma Sooners. Kickoff is at 12:45 p.m. on Saturday on SEC Network. I will be there covering the game for Gamecock Central, and it is going to be a really good time. Never been to Oklahoma, so that'll be a new experience for me, and I'm sure a lot of you if you're making the trip out there. So be safe if you're going out there. Meanwhile, baseball is off the rest of this week as it is currently fall break. They'll be back in action next week before they take on Air Force next Saturday, October 26th at 4 p.m. at Founders Park for their first of two fall exhibition games, the other one coming against the College of Charleston in November. And then as for men's basketball, we're getting closer and closer to tip-off. October 30th, they'll play an exhibition game against Worcester at Colonial Life Arena, 7 p.m. And then a few days later, November 4th, the season officially tips off, the regular season that is, against North Florida on November 4th at 7 p.m. at CLA. It's going to be a great time. Hopefully a great season and a lot of stuff going on in Gamecock athletics right now. So be sure to stay locked into GamecockCentral.com for all live updates, coverage, and so much more. A lot is going to be coming on the way, and I hope you guys are around for it. It is going to be a great time. So that's going to do it for today's episode. I'll see y'all later on next week's episode. Have a great weekend. Bye.